The year was 2009, almost a decade ago, and back then, mobile manufacturers were still toying around with the form factor of phones, trying to figure out what sticks and what doesn't. Foldable phones and bendable displays are the latest rage. Back then, one of the trends were transparency. LG came out with what they claimed at the time to be the first design phone that had a transparent panel, and this is the LG Crystal that we'll be revisiting in this video today. The other transparent phone that came out around the same time was from Sony, called the Sony Xperia Pure. Made from OLED without anything blocking, so if you're holding the phone, basically your hand could be seen from the other side. A very cool idea, but both the Sony as well as the LG, for the most part, were not very mainstream or popular devices. The whole design name basically implies that it's more of a concept phone, just because they simply weren't very practical. Aside from looking very cool, yes, it seems like something that steps out of a science fiction novel, but truly doesn't add too much value to the end user. In fact, it may actually detract from the usefulness because the screen could be a little harder to read. It could be something that evades your privacy more if those around you can actually see what you're looking at from the other side, and so definitely is not quite as justifiable as, say, bendable phones from today are when it comes to the value proposition, but still was an interesting trend to observe. So LG does seem to be very experimental with their phone designs, which is something I've always appreciated, that they've wanted to be a little bit different. So the Crystal doesn't really have a true transparent screen, in my opinion. It's more like a transparent panel, but as you can see here, it does also have a digitizer. It allows you to interact and use it for navigation, and also pinch to zoom works. You can use it to make phone calls like a slider phone, but it also has more of a regular touchscreen display up top. Now, as with other devices circa 2009 from LG, it is running on their proprietary operating system called S-Class, but did allow you to do basic things like act as a media player, browse the web. Yes, there was built-in Wi-Fi, there was also built-in Bluetooth, and you can also download Java games and titles to play it along. So a bit more advanced than I say just a regular feature phone or a dumb phone, but definitely is lacking more support like Android today through a giant app store. So we take a closer look at the hardware first. Now the phone is absolutely tiny and petite by today's standards. It only has a 3-inch panel. Back then that was actually considered pretty comfortable for a touchscreen phone. So if we compare against something like a Essential phone that has a 5.7-inch screen, you can see how the difference is night and day. Now the LG Crystal does also have a front-facing camera for video chatting, pretty advanced for its time. We also have touch-sensitive keys below which take us back, act as a hang-up and call key, and this middle button here is what takes us to this cube that is a 3D visualization of all the pages that you have on your home screens. On the left edge we have a cover for the micro USB port, and also that's where the headphone jack also sits. So believe it or not, this phone also didn't have a headphone jack or a standard 3.5mm port. You had to use a micro USB to 3.5mm adapter. That just brings back 2019 vibes. Now on the very top there's also a dedicated power key / lock switch, and on the other spine we have access to a volume rocker along with a camera shutter key. On the rear, the whole transparent theme continues as LG tried to create a gradient finish on the back cover that goes from transparent, being able to see the battery underneath, which is 1000 milliamp hours, and it's removable, along with the SIM card slot is underneath this, to a pure black onto the top. The textured surface here also contains an LED flash, selfie mirror, and an 8-megapixel autofocus camera, which for 2009 was actually one of the highest megapixels that you could find. The transparent slider pad is technically made from Corning's Gorilla Glass, and that's what allows it to support multi-touch, and again it is backlit, so you can kind of see the keys even when the lights are dimmed, and creates a very cool effect. However, it's not the most practical when it comes to the buttons themselves. Obviously don't have any tactile sensation to them, so unlike a regular keyboard where you can actually physically press down and feel the click, that's not something that you'll find here. It's mostly just for aesthetic purposes. Now again, the S-Class interface here is quite simple. We have just one screen that can show us our contacts. Basically we only have one widget on that page. On here we have a main page that has more widgets that we can customize through, including a clock, including emails, a calculator, and you can tap directly on these to interact with them. So there are a few kind of widgets built on in by default. I can also tap on the top of the display to bring down the notification shade to turn on or off Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, go into the music player, and see quick notifications. So let's talk about the camera now. Even though this was considered a really good performer back in the day, we have clearly evolved in leaps and bounds. I would say that color accuracy is not great. It has a slightly yellowish tint by today's standards, and also, even though it has a good amount of detail if you crop in, because 8 megapixels isn't that shabby, overall the shutter speed is definitely on the slow side, just because the processing power back in 2009 is nowhere near as mature as today's smartphones. Another interesting gesture that you can use with this D-pad is use a circular motion in order to act as zoom controls. So it really is fully interactive with all elements of the phone. Otherwise, we can change between the main and the front-facing camera. We can also change the image size, apply some different effects. So for a 2009 camera app, it's actually not too bad. And we can use pinch to zoom gestures on the display itself or also on the touchpad, as we can see here, to basically navigate around, which is pretty cool. But the processor is definitely sluggish by today's standards. It even takes a moment for you to kind of register to pinch to zoom, as you can see there. For sure not as fast as today's phones, but you can interact with it just by moving around. It also has these very dramatic 3D animations for switching back and forth between images and collection, which is kind of fun. It's very much inspired by cover flow, what Apple used to do on their iPod Touch and first generation iPhones. Typing out messages can be pretty difficult with a T9 layout, and it's definitely not the most convenient thing in the world, but luckily we can use the phone's accelerometer, we can tilt it to the other orientation, and that brings us back a traditional QWERTY keyboard that is much more comfortable for the purposes of text entry. So here's the MTOY library, and we're able to see some collections of games that are, again, developed from LG, like T-Pong, which is basically trying to balance this ping pong board by flicking up your ping pong paddle whenever the ball jumps and gets close to the surface. It uses the accelerometer to detect what orientation you want to hit the ball, and that will detect how it moves the next time. So there's also haptic vibration that kind of buzzes whenever the ping pong ball hits the surface of the paddle. The simple dice app that you can use to roll 2 dice, and you can customize how many that you want to roll. There's also some very simple board games that you can play around with in this particular app. And here's a candle app, which basically the flames will interact with the amount of wind that the microphone detects. Now, yes, the other applications technically do still function. If you're talking about connecting to Wi-Fi, you can still use a web browser to, say, go to google.com and do a very quick search. And YouTube basically gives you a redirect to the mobile YouTube site. However, it's not going to be a very enjoyable experience just because the phone is so out of date and the processor is so sluggish by today's standards. It's going to be very time-consuming to load anything serious. So, unfortunately, it's not going to be your best candidate for web browsing or streaming videos anymore unless it's already stored on the phone's memory. So that's more or less it as far as our revisited look at the LG GD900 Crystal. It's really interesting to see how trends just come and go in the mobile electronics space, and so much has evolved in the decade since. So today, the LG Crystal and the Sony Xperia Pureness pretty much are failed experiments, or maybe remain as collectibles to those really interested in mobile electronics history. But anyways, as we turn towards the next page, it's interesting to think what trends will come and go next. Do you guys think that bendable phones are here to stay, or do you think it's going to go the same route as transparent phone displays? Let us know in the comments down below. But for now, that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the LG Crystal.